us pray. As Canadians and as Albertans, we give thanks for the precious gifts of freedom and peace which we enjoy. As members of this Legislative Assembly, we rededicate ourselves to the valued traditions of parliamentary democracy as a means of serving our province and our country. Amen. If honourable members wishing to get into question period could wait for just half a moment. At the beginning of a session, it is customary that we pay our respects to former members who have died since we have last met. Thank goodness no one has died since we last met. But on behalf of all members, I would like to express our appreciation and that of all Albertans to the members of our last legislature who, for one reason or another, are no longer present in this assembly. And so I would invite honourable members to applaud in the usual manner for those who have taken that choice. Also, on behalf of all members of the Assembly, we extend congratulations to the member for Calgary Mountain View on the occasion of his recent marriage. The following statement will be circulated to all members of the House, and this is where we have the guidelines with respect to question period and other housekeeping matters. Members will notice on their desks is a brochure, a short letter, and a pin, and these items are part and parcel of each member's responsibility as a parliamentarian. For each of you as a member of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association Alberta branch. This summer, Alberta has the pleasure of hosting the 29th Regional Conference in both Calgary and Edmonton, and some of you will be asked to play an active role in this conference. With regard to question period, the House leaders and myself met, and a format mutually agreed to will be implemented. Each main question will be followed by 2 supplementary questions by the same person. No additional supplementary questions shall be allowed. In the previous legislature, the Leader of the Official Opposition or his designate will ask the first 2 series of questions. The member for Edmonton-Glengarry or his designate will then ask 1 set of questions, followed by a representative of government members asking 1 set of questions. After these 4 sets of questions have been dealt with, the remainder of question period will be conducted on a random basis. If a minister supplies additional information to a question at the end of question period or after subsequent question periods, the member who asked the original question will have the opportunity to ask 1 supplementary question to which the minister may reply. All points of order and questions of privilege shall be dealt with at the end of question period, as stated in Beauchesne, section 317, subsection 3. But then again, perhaps there would never be any points of order raised in question period. In order to raise a relevant point of order or question of privilege at any time, it is the member's responsibility to cite the appropriate reference from Standing Orders or Beauchesne. It should be noted that the 6th edition of Beauchene's Parliamentary Rules and Forms is now available, and it is from this edition which members should make reference. With regard to ministerial statements, I have been advised that ministers will attempt to make themselves as brief as possible. Only the Leader of the Official Opposition will have up to 3 minutes to respond to ministerial statements. So as to alert all members, the Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud only will be able to enter and exit the chamber during sitting hours through the main doors. As always, other members may use those doors prior to evening sittings and after regular sitting hours. I look forward to upcoming challenges that will no doubt occur, and I look forward to it with a great deal of anticipation and excitement. Thank you. Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
If I may take a moment from the House's business to ask the House to join me in finding out that you indeed had lost your head yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and I want to have the House join me in congratulating you on your engagement to be married.
Introduction of visitors.
It is my sincere pleasure to introduce to you and all members of the Assembly today the recently elected Member of Parliament for Edmonton East who is seated in your gallery. He is my friend, former colleague, and fellow New Democrat, Ross Harvey.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Fish. Member for Fishkill.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of my intention to move following the completion of routine orders and before the calling of orders of the day, and pursuant to Standing Order 40, the following motion. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly congratulate the Calgary Flames, players, coaches, management, and support staff for their remarkable achievement in winning their first Stanley Cup.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I am tabling 4 annual reports today. Firstly, the 1987-88 annual report of Alberta Agriculture. Secondly, the 1988 annual report of the Alberta Veterinary Medical Association. Thirdly, the 1988 annual report of the Farmers Advocate. And fourthly, the 1987-88 annual report of the Alberta Agricultural Products Marketing Council.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to table with the Assembly also 4 copies of the 1987-88 annual report of the Department of Economic Development, 4 copies of the annual report of the Alberta Motion Picture Development Corporation, and 4 copies of the 87-88 annual report of the Alberta Opportunity Company.
Minister of Public Works, Provincial Treasurer.
Mr. Speaker, I have several filings and tablings which I would like to present to the Assembly, some as a result of statute and some to provide the fullest possible information with respect to the government's activities over the past year. They include the public accounts, they include the Alberta Municipal Finance Corporation annual report, the Alberta Resources Railway annual report, Government Land Purchases Act, the Alberta Treasury annual report, the statements of 354713, and the statements of Northwest Trust Company.
Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table with the Assembly this morning the 4th annual report of the Wild Rose Foundation.
The Honourable Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to file with the House the annual report for April 1, 1987 to March 31, 1988 for the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues.
Minister of Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the 1986-87 annual reports for Fairview College, Red Deer College, Mount Royal College, and the statistical report for the Department of Advanced Education. Mr. Speaker, copies of these reports have already been provided to all members at the legislative offices.
Thank you. Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report of the Alberta Municipal Affairs for the year 1987-88.
Honorable Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, I have the honor to submit and table the annual report of the Department of the Solicitor General for the year ending March 31st, 1988.
I have the honor to table the second annual report of the Legislative Assembly Office, and pursuant to the Legislative Assembly Act, copies of members' services orders approved since the last sitting of the legislature.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Ponoka, member for Lacombe. Close.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure this morning to introduce to you and through you to the members of the legislature 20 students from the Lacombe Junior High School. They're accompanied this morning by 3 teachers, Evelyn Rempel, Karen Ainsworth, and Faye Sweater. Now, I missed meeting them this morning. I was in caucus. I apologize to them, but I wish them well on their trip up here today. And I'd ask them to rise, whether sitting in the members' gallery, and receive the traditional welcome of this legislature.
Member for Drumheller.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly some very special people seated in the members' gallery. They are 24 grade 6 students from St. Anthony's School in Drumheller, and they are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Jerry Hamilton, parents Virginia Haar, Joan Rowell, and Pascott, Shirley Rollheiser, and their bus driver, Tim Harrison. I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Rocky Mountain House, followed by Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, it does indeed give me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you and the members of this Assembly a group of 23 students from the Living Faith Christian School of Caroline, along with their teachers, Pastor and Mrs. Stallwick, David Moore, and Mrs. Doreen Van Dursten. I too missed meeting them because I was in caucus, and I wish them the best in their trip up here. They are seated in the public gallery, so I would ask that they would too rise and be welcomed by this group.
Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of my colleague, the Minister of the Environment, who is in Calgary proclaiming Environment Week, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly some grade 6 students from St. Monica Community School in the constituency of Calgary-Elbow. They are seated in the public gallery, Mr. Speaker, and they're accompanied by their teachers, Donna Steffes, Mark Perry, Geraldine Taylor, and the community school coordinator, Lisa Wilson. I'd ask that they stand and be recognized by the Assembly.
Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly a well-known physicist, Mr. Austin Marden. He's a constituent, a graduate of the University of Lethbridge, and an Antarctic explorer. He is a holder of the Congressional Naval Antarctic Service Medal of the United States and is preparing to lead an Argentinian expedition into the Antarctic in October to search for meteorites. He tells me that his personal emblem of recognition on his snowmobile is an Alberta flag, which doubtless will constitute a record of some sort. If Mr. Marden will stand and receive our usual welcome.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Order. I'm sorry, honorable members. I can appreciate your enthusiasm. The traditional form in this House is the thumping of the desk and not the applause of the hands. Perhaps we could do a rerun and you could do it in that fashion. Honorable House Leader?
A point of order for after question period.
Thank you, honorable member. The other member is called to order for clapping.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct my first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, Albertans, frankly, are sick and tired of governments that will say anything during an election campaign to get elected and then have a totally different agenda after. We saw it with this government in 86 to 87. Mr. Speaker, we saw it with the recent federal government. You just can't trust federal or conservative governments, Mr. Speaker.
Right. You're here.
And I'd like to quote, Mr. Speaker, a campaign quote from the Premier. He says, the only way taxes are going to go in Alberta is down. That's an absolute pledge, promise, whatever you want to call it. My question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is that still an absolute pledge, Mr. Speaker, that there'll be no increases in any taxes for Alberta families?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that the honourable member was following the comments during the election so closely. And as I've said many times inside or outside of the House, that the government's commitment on income taxes, which were being discussed, stands.
Mr. Speaker, I have 11 quotes in here that said nothing about income taxes. It had to do specifically with taxes, Mr. Speaker. And my question again to the Premier, is he now saying that the only thing that he was talking about was income taxes and that Albertans can look forward to taxes in the next year from this government?
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the honourable member is going to have to wait for the budget. There's no question in my mind that when we make a commitment during an election or any time, we live up to those commitments.
Mr. Speaker, semantics games are not funny to Albertans. They're going to be facing tax increases.
That's right.
We're not talking about the budget. We're talking about campaign promises from this Premier, Mr. Speaker. And is the Premier now saying that his campaign promises during the election don't mean anything, that he was actually misleading the people, and that all sorts of other taxes are fair game right now? Those 11 quotes are there, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I just answered the question already when I said to him that this government, when it makes commitments, lives up to them.
Mr. Speaker, we can continue this, Mr. Speaker. Again, I want to say just in 86, they said one thing and then they had an entirely different agenda when they came back, Mr. Speaker.
Right.
They frankly lied to the people of Alberta in that election, Mr. Speaker, and I think that they lied to the people in this last election by the Premier's comments, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
Honourable member.
Speaker, we're talking about the truth during the election. Now, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the speech from the throne. In the one on February the 17th, all glowing reports. Election coming up, Mr. Speaker. Albertans are experiencing a surge of confidence and investment flowing through our province. The outlook for jobs and business growth in communities all across Alberta is strong and dynamic.
Yeah.
But what do we find out, Mr. Speaker? What do we find out in the new one? Just 10 weeks later, Mr. Speaker, all of a sudden they're saying, oh, unforeseen circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I anticipated to be a little tougher than it was, Mr. Speaker. Which was the truth, Mr. Speaker? Was the February the 17th throne speech or the June the 1st one the truth, Mr. Speaker?
Hear, hear.
Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously the throne speech, if the honourable member was listening to Her Honour yesterday, reaffirms the legislative and budgetary policies and priorities and programs outlined at the opening of the fourth session of the 21st legislature on February the 17th, 1989, which was so strongly endorsed by Albertans.
That's right. There's a quote.
Mr. Speaker, that's why they went from 60% of the vote to 44%. That's a mandate. Mr. Speaker, and I quote from the throne speech, he said the remaining month of the fiscal year 1989-90 will be more difficult than first anticipated. My question to the Premier is why don't you come clean and tell the truth? What you're really saying is in the future there's going to be tax increases on Alberta families and cutbacks in people services. That's what you mean.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's not what we're saying at all.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that's precisely what you're saying. Albertans are not that foolish. They know what this government's up to. And the question I want to make, in view of the record of this government in 86 to 87, and in view of their backtracking right now, Why should Alberta families ever trust this government again? And they won't, Mr. Speaker.
They can't trust them.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether you allow me to repeat again the very comments that Her Honour made yesterday. During this important session, my government will reaffirm the legislative and budgetary policies for priorities and programs outlined at the opening of the fourth session on February the 17th, 1989. Another quote, because the honourable member was talking about the economy, new confidence and investments flow across Alberta. A dramatic and historic breakthrough has been made in the promotion of a diverse economy. Am I going too fast for him, Mr. Speaker?
Great. You can't ask questions. Okay. Honourable member for Edmonton Glengarry, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker, as the first Liberal to stand in this forum, I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate you on your election. We look forward to exciting, as you've mentioned, an exciting forum for the next few weeks and months. That's not the preamble. Mr. Speaker, contrary to statements by the provincial treasurer, Alberta has become a net debtor province to the tune of $2.5 billion, even after considering the Heritage Trust Fund assets. Yet the government's financial statements continue to mislead the people of Alberta because despite of the advice of the Auditor General, our Auditor General, the government does not include well over $8 billion in liabilities for future pension obligations in its statement of assets and liabilities. The question to the Premier: if the Premier believes in fiscal integrity, can he tell the House why his government has continued for years to mislead Albertans by not reporting this $8 billion plus in liabilities on the provincial government's economic balance sheet?
Mr. Speaker, obviously it's a matter for the provincial treasurer, and ask him to respond to the honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, it's good to see that the member from Glengarry is reading the financial statements. If we take just a bit longer, Mr. Speaker, he'd find that this pension liability is revealed on the financial statements of the government. It has traditionally been put on the footnotes of the financial statement along with all other information. And Mr. Speaker, this form of disclosure is exactly the kind of disclosure that every government in Canada uses. And Mr. Speaker, I know it's under assessment by the Institute of Chartered Accountants right now, but let me make it very clear that there is no attempt to mislead anyone, that this is traditional disclosure form, and in fact it is revealed in financial statements. As a matter of fact, we'll see them when we file the statements again this year.
Well, I'd like to, Mr. Speaker, put it to the provincial treasurer. Is he prepared to admit, knowing that the Institute of Chartered Accountants has sent out a memo on this issue, knowing that our own provincial Auditor General has taken a stand, is he prepared to admit that our province is a net debtor province?
Oh, no, Mr. Speaker.
Well, come on.
Quite to the contrary, Mr. Speaker. I could give the member a little lesson in what we have in the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, provide him with an outline of the assets which are available to this government. There's one very important point, though, Mr. Speaker. This government is the only government with more assets and liabilities, despite what he is saying, and we have disclosed it in that fashion, Mr. Speaker, and we're proud of that financial record.
Mr. Speaker, I want to put the question and I want an answer. Is the provincial treasurer going to continue to ignore the advice, the recommendation of our own Auditor General, and is he going to continue to ignore the advice by way of memo from the Institute of Chartered Accountants saying this is the way it should be? You should put it in the financial statements. Are you going to continue ignoring it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's not a question of ignoring it. I have already advised the House, and through you, Mr. Speaker, that in fact we have disclosed the pension liabilities on a matter consistent with the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and we will continue to review the recommendations that we receive from the Auditor General, along with a variety of other recommendations as to financial disclosure. But we have not misled anyone. We have been consistent with the postulates, not the memos, of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and our disclosure has been fair and accurate. Any statement to the contrary, Mr. Speaker, is misleading, and that's not what this Assembly is about.
Calgary Glenmore, followed by Edmonton Jasper Place.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, June the 1st, there was an announcement made regarding DuPont Canada's decision to construct a hydrogen peroxide plant in Alberta. Could the Honourable Minister of Economic Development and Trade please give this Assembly some indication as to the assurances we have for Alberta content and spin-off benefits for Albertans, since there will only be 65 jobs created?
Mr. Speaker, let me indicate to the honourable member the delight that we feel with the DuPont announcement, whereby they are going to invest some $120 million in the province of Alberta, creating some 65 jobs. In discussions I have had with DuPont, they have left me with the assurance that it is their desire to have a 70% Alberta content as it relates to both the construction. They're also going to make sure that there are 60 individuals receiving specific training so that they can have 60 of the 65 jobs created here in the province of Alberta. We're delighted, and this is just one of the many spin-off benefits as it relates to the forestry projects that are coming on stream.
Mr. Speaker, will the Honourable Minister indicate if there are any government loan guarantees with this project?
Mr. Speaker, there has been no request from DuPont for loan guarantees or direct government support, but I would believe that they will be coming back to the government as it relates to some of our excellent job career training proposals that we do have under the appropriate minister, and there might be a possibility of some small injection as it relates to the infrastructure costs in establishing the plant here, but there is no request for direct assistance from the government.
Mr. Speaker, would the Honourable Minister please indicate the specific reason for locating in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, the reason indicated to us, and they did do a number of tests on a North America-wide basis as to where they should establish this plant. The main reason being the development of the forestry industry within the province of Alberta. And Mr. Speaker, this is just but one of the many examples that underscores the vibrance and the strength of this great Alberta economy.
Edmonton Jasper Place, followed by Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question concerns the most important environmental issue in the province today, which is the northern pulp developments. There's no Minister of Environment here. I wonder if I could ask a question to the Premier. I'd like to plead with the Premier to recognize the problems that are caused by not having a proper environmental impact assessment process on these projects. This week, in the capital city, there have been meetings with the Federal Department of Environment, the Federal Environmental Review Office, and I think Alberta Environment as well, about a coming federal environmental impact assessment into these projects. I think you have to wonder why this government thought it could go ahead with them all without a proper environmental impact assessment. The question to the Premier is, has he decided to order a proper environmental impact assessment process in Alberta with public hearings, fundings for interveners as an alternative to this federal inquiry?
Before the Premier responds, it is indeed appropriate call to order that it is not appropriate under Beauchesne to make comment as to whether a member is absent in the House. The Premier, please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first to inform the honourable member, the government always makes sure that proper environmental control measures are taken with any development in this province. Other than that, though, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member should wait for the Minister of Environment to be in the House. We take his question as notice and have him reply to it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think we have an environmental impact assessment process that gives voice to the wealthy and powerful, but not to ordinary people in the province. I wonder if the Premier would stand in his place today and deny that there is no Alberta study that looks at the combined impact of 7 major projects. You got studies on individual projects, but there's nothing that looks at the combined effect on 2 river systems that flow north. Does he deny that?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member wants to debate. He can debate in a more appropriate circumstance. My same answer stands.
Agreed.
Goes for debate, Tom? Come on.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not getting very far today. I wonder if I could ask the question of the Minister of Forests. The Minister is in the process of negotiating forest management agreements to cover almost a third or 30% of the land mass of the province. I wonder if he's decided to back off on giving away more of our forest land until we have an environmental impact assessment on that process involving public hearings and intervener funding.
Mr. Speaker, this government has never given away a forest resource, and we certainly aren't doing it in this case, and I'd like to correct the honourable member's reference to the land mass of Alberta. We're not giving away any land at all. We're negotiating timber rights. There's been a series of open public meetings in the area to discuss the whole aspect of a forest management agreement, and of course those negotiations are now underway.
Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this province needs a proper environmental impact assessment process for those projects which have major or significant environmental implications. To be proper, this process must be geographically comprehensive, it must consider cumulative effects, and it must be done by the Department of Environment, but be paid by the proponent company. To the Premier, will the Premier please explain why the environmental impact assessments of Alberta Pacific and other pulp projects in the north, why those assessments have not conformed to any of these very important criteria?
Mr. Speaker, as I said earlier, the environmental impact assessment in this province on any developments are carried out by the government, made sure that they are properly handled in the best interests of the people of Alberta. The honourable member wants to get into more details on environmental matters. He should just patiently wait. The Minister of Environment will be in the House in the future.
Order. They are not proper until they have addressed these criteria. Will the Premier please state today that he will place a moratorium on these projects until such time as we have proper environmental impact assessment processes in place in the legislation and approved by this legislature?
I've noticed over the years in the House, Mr. Speaker, that when members have a weak basis, they usually raise their voice.
That's right.
However, Mr. Speaker, the answer to the honourable member is no.
Will the Premier admit simply that he does not have the political will to stop these projects, to even delay these projects until such time as we have a proper environmental impact assessment process, because he wants this development no matter what the cost to the environment of this province?
You've sold out. Again, Mr. Speaker, the answer is no.
Bow Valley, followed by Vegreville, followed by Cardston.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs, and it's concerning our new homeowners and mortgage interest shielding program. To date, have there been any applications approved under this program?
Right? Well, you gotta...
Mr. Speaker, as an aside, I want to say that I didn't write the answer to the question. Usually on that side of the House I did. Mr. Speaker, in answer to my colleague's question, the honourable member from Bow Valley, we have had a great amount of interest in the mortgage interest shielding program, as well as the Family First Home program. Since March the 1st, we've had some 16,000 telephone calls from across the province, which we responded to. Secondly, we have 5,700 applications in process, and 4,600 of those are in terms of mortgage interest shielding. 1,000 are in terms of the Family First Home program.
Mr. Speaker, my first supplementary is to do with the March 1st deadline of the interest shielding and the first homeowners program. If a person was to negotiate a mortgage or a purchase of a home before March 1st but didn't take possession until sometime later, would they still be eligible under the program?
Mr. Speaker, yes, date of possession is the date of application.
It's my understanding by the answer that the majority of the applications are for the interest shielding program, but and that's understandable. But the new homeowners program are those are people that are strictly on their first home and have never owned a home before.
Mr. Speaker, that's correct. There's a 5-year term in there in which they haven't had a home, and it's their first home in the province for Alberta residents and citizens.
Member for Vegreville, followed by Cardston, followed by Edmonton Whiteman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The U.S. government has recently put yet another countervailing duty on imports of Canadian pork, an action that hurts Alberta farm families and the industry they support. Now, all through the debate on free trade and in their throne speeches, Mr. Speaker, this government brags about the assured access to the U.S. market that this free trade deal will provide. Yet another example of a government who can't be trusted to tell the truth to Albertans. And I'd like the Minister of Agriculture to tell the pork producers in our province what specific actions he's taking to protect their industry from these countervailing duties.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the honourable member from Vegreville should be clear that this is not related to free trade. There is absolutely nothing in the free trade agreement that prevents either party to that agreement from expressing concern if they feel another party is subsidizing. There is, however, something in that agreement that can expedite the resolution of that matter.
Mr. Speaker, this government made it perfectly clear that they were willing to jeopardize many sectors of agriculture and indeed Canadian society so that we'd have guaranteed access.
Right.
We don't have guaranteed access, and this government fails to stand up for Alberta farmers.
Right.
I'd like to ask the minister, given the fact that this is taking $300,000 a month out of the pockets of pork producers, what assurances he can give these people that the government takes their low-income situation seriously.
Can't trust. Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Pork Producers Marketing Board is working hand in hand with us, other provincial governments, and the federal governments in dealing with the countervail situation. The honourable member should be aware that the 3.5 cents a pound is being held in trust until the final resolution of that matter, and the timetable before we'll reach the final resolution of that matter is probably September of 1989.
Well, is the minister saying then that he's prepared to stand by and watch $300,000 a month being taken out of the pockets of pork producers, their families, and the communities they support while they wait for the Americans to decide what we can and can't do in Alberta?
Mr. Speaker, let me reiterate, the Alberta Pork Marketing Board is very aware and involved of what is going on. Under the free trade agreement, either party to that agreement can express concern if they feel a subsidy is in place by the other government that will injure their industry. The judge is still out on that. At this point in time, no money has been taken out of the producer. That money is being held in trust and may flow back through the Alberta processors to the producers.
Member for Cardston, followed by Edmonton Whiteman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the provincial treasurer. Historically, in this province, and I suppose all other provinces, Budget Day is a big and important day to Albertans. Some look forward to it with anticipation, others with anxiety. To date, the provincial treasurer has only told us that we can anticipate the budget prior to June 15th. Can he yet give us a more firm date as to when the budget will be introduced to this Assembly?
Mr. Speaker, with all the anticipation and certainly misleading information from the opposition across the way, I've been in consultation with the Premier and the House leaders, and we have agreed to move the date ahead simply to provide as much information about the stewardship, the good stewardship and management of this province, to provide an opportunity to talk about the fiscal responsibility of this government, and to give full information about how this government is going to survive and have strong economic...
Okay, Honourable Minister, perhaps. Member for Cardston.
Mr. Speaker, the noise from across the way is very unsettling, Mr. Speaker. Let me conclude, Mr. Speaker, by indicating publicly today that we will bring the budget forward on June the 8th, Thursday at 8 p.m. in the afternoon. 8 p.m. in the afternoon.
Supplementary to the Treasurer, during the recent campaign and up until the present date, there has been a lot of questions asked on the deficit situation in our province, and I just wonder if the Provincial Treasurer is prepared to continue with his initiative of deficit reduction with a direction and goal towards a balanced budget.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to give that commitment clearly, but I can sense a certain nervousness already if we start to advance the budget debate. I know that you want to have an opportunity for the fullest possible explanation of our fiscal plan and our deficit reduction plan. Yes. But I think I'd better hold any further comments until the budget address, sir.
Really doesn't want to be confronted with what's been happening in another house in the country. Final supplementary, Carson. Thank you. Member for Edmonton-Whitemud. West Yellowhead, followed by Edmonton-Whitemud. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The chair apologizes for its own handwriting here. It is indeed Edmonton-Whitemud, followed by West Yellowhead. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is directed to the Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism. Recently, several cultural centers in the city of Edmonton have been forced to accept a settlement on outstanding taxation arrears, which could force some of them to close their doors. What action is the minister prepared to take to ensure that these ethno-cultural associations are not forced out of operation?
Mr. Speaker, the question concerning the ethnocultural centers is more of a municipal matter. I've discussed this matter as it relates to Edmonton with the mayor, and he indicates to me that he has found a solution based on his abilities to do that.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister of Culture and Multiculturalism not realize that this very Assembly passed two bills exempting two cultural centers? This very Assembly. Does the Minister not realize that?
Mr. Speaker, yes.
Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that the Minister has acknowledged that this Assembly has in fact approved two such bills, does this Minister still maintain that it is a municipal responsibility? And if not, what action is he prepared to take?
Mr. Speaker, I am fully aware that bills were passed in this legislature some time ago regarding individual centers. The honourable member's question does not relate to those individual centers. It relates to a whole range of centers. And it is the commitment of this government, and it is certainly the commitment of my department, that we will be acting in a fair and even-handed manner towards all individuals in this province, and we feel very comfortable that the appropriate action will be taken that will be fair to each and every one concerned, because that is our commitment.
Member for West Yellowhead, followed by Avonmore, followed by Calgary-McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, in a government news release dated February the 16th, 1989,
this government made an announcement regarding the site of the Western Premiers Conference, which I now quote from. The people of West Yellowhead region will have the opportunity to demonstrate the warm hospitality and enthusiasm that is our hallmark. Mr. Speaker, the warmth and hospitality of the people of Edson has not changed. What has changed, Mr. Speaker, is the intent of this government to withdraw the conference from Edson and punish the people of West Yellowhead for not holding the conference there. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier now withdraw the comments made by the Deputy Premier last week to reporters when he quite bluntly admitted that the conference was moved to punish the residents of Edson and West Yellowhead?
Shame, shame. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for West Yellowhead coming into the Assembly should be prepared to quote with accuracy what actually took place and not mislead the Assembly in any way at all. Never did the Deputy Premier say that there was an effort to punish the people of West Yellowhead, and the honourable member should know that. He does know it, and he's not going to help himself or his constituents by conducting himself in that manner.
Mr. Speaker, will the government now listen to the residents of West Yellowhead and to all fair-minded Albertans across this province and return the conference to its original site? Or is this simply another demonstration of how Albertans cannot trust this government to keep its promises?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asked two questions in one in that particular exchange, but I'll respond this way to the honourable member. The answer is that we have made a decision that the conference will be properly and quite well hosted in the constituency in the city of Camrose, and the honourable member, of course, having engaged in the most recent comments and the comments outside the Assembly, can take credit or otherwise for what a decision has been made.
Supplementary question, West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, given the nature of the government's actions towards the people of the region, not overly supportive of the government, can the Premier now tell us what other areas of the province will be punished in the future for not electing a Conservative member to this House? My question is to the Premier. To the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, of course, the allegations contained in the question are absolutely false, and it's disappointing that a member commences his service here with that kind of an action. Might I say, Mr. Speaker, it's also sad to see the honourable members trying to break what I think has been a tradition of decorum in this legislature.
It's one thing on opening day to have a little bit of leeway, especially on behalf of new members trying to feel their way in the House, but it's not going to be allowed to continue in terms of the kind of raucous stuff. The chair recognizes Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, given that the government has not followed through on many of the promises which it made in the February throne speech, and by failing to mention these promises has thrown the issues into limbo, women in Alberta surely can be forgiven for thinking that the government cannot be counted on to stand up for the interests of women either before or after elections. In view of the omissions from the throne speech yesterday of any reference to action to be made on the recommendations put forward by the Advisory Council on women's issues, would the Premier advise this Assembly why the government has decided not to act on these recommendations?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the minister responsible for women's issues may want to supplement my reply, but I draw again to the attention of the honourable member, as I did to her leader, that the government's throne speech is very clear, and if she would spend time reading the throne speech rather than perhaps some media reports, she would know that the government has reaffirmed the policies and priorities and programs outlined in the previous throne speech on February 17th, 1989. And I just draw to the honourable member's attention that I pointed that out to her leader, and she should be able to follow the message from the Lieutenant Governor and draw the same conclusion.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask the Premier, where is his reference in yesterday's throne speech to develop women's education, training and employment choices, encourage women's involvement in public life, and address the needs of Alberta women that have identified in health and social services? Where are those economic initiatives addressed in yesterday's throne speech?
What page? Mr. Speaker, the same answer applies.
Oh, goodness.
Mr. Speaker, another issue that was not addressed in yesterday's throne speech that was addressed in the February throne speech was the issue of homemakers' pensions. Is the Premier going to advise us that he will follow through on his investigation of the implementation of homemakers' pensions for women over 55 in this province?
The answer is yes, and it's carried in the throne speech, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Calgary-McKnight, followed by Edmonton Highlands, if there's time. Calgary-McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, it appears that the government plans to proceed with the Alberta Pacific project near Athabasca, which will bring almost 2,000 workers and their families into the area and have a major social impact on local communities. My question is to the Minister of Education. Has the Minister consulted with the local school board to assure that the planning is in place to accommodate the resulting increase in student population?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. When I met with the Athabasca School Board during Education Week, that was a matter which we discussed.
Supplementary, will the Minister then table a report to this Assembly so that the Alberta public may examine this report, giving us all of the details as to the plans? I think it is important for other communities affected as well to know what the plans are.
Mr. Speaker, there is no such report that I'm familiar with. The school board, of course, has anticipated the growth that will occur in the community as a result of that plant, which is one more example of the tremendous growth and diversification of the province, which is bringing those families to that area of the province. And we will consider their request for funding for new capital construction, for expansion of their existing facilities, in line with all of the other requests that are before the school buildings branch.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Health, what steps has the Minister taken to ensure that appropriate health care facilities and adequate numbers of health care personnel will be available to the expanded population in the area?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be glad to take that question as notice and advise the Minister on her return.
Thank you. Member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker and comrades. Mr. Speaker, I too noticed, as did everybody else in the New Democrat caucus, that there's a world of difference in the wording between the throne speech that was tabled yesterday and the throne speech that was introduced on February 17th, Mr. Speaker. I listened to the Premier's comments with interest, but I note that he hasn't explained why it is that there's such a wording change if the intentions remain the same. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask one question to the Minister of Education. who at least temporarily had recognized the importance on February 17th of inner-city schools and the community schools, and asked what happened to the commitment for 100% community school funding, February 17th, not in yesterday's throne speech, and what happened to the specifics about nutritional and health care in the same throne speech.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd refer the honourable member to page 8 of yesterday's throne speech, wherein Her Honour read that enhanced equity funding for school boards, additional support for schools with inner-city special needs in Edmonton and Calgary, and increased funding for community schools. I also refer to the honourable member to page 1 of the same throne speech, which recalls the February 17 throne speech and makes those same commitments. I invite the honourable member to await the honourable provincial treasurer's speech 6 days from now, and that good news will be in that same budget.
So, Mr. Speaker, the minister seems to be quite categorical about this. Is he really saying, is he telling us that the community schools designated now in Alberta and those waiting to be designated will receive 100% of the funding that goes with that designation? Is he committing himself to that?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will have to wait for the throne speech. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member will have to wait for the budget address, but I refer her again to paragraph 2 of yesterday's throne speech, which recalls the February 17, 1989 throne speech, wherein those same commitments were made.
They kind of learned it.
I don't believe this government can be trusted on this issue, Mr. Speaker.
Or any issue.
Now, I have one more supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to address it to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, who may want to explain why it is that the throne speech on February 17th referred to specific programs dealing with inner-city housing and non-profit housing for the poor people of this province, but somehow failed to mention the specifics in yesterday's throne speech.
4 years to wear out.
Mr. Speaker, I admire the concern of the honourable member from Edmonton Highlands with regards to this issue. The February 17th throne speech made a commitment, and as a minister of this government, I intend to follow through on that commitment and initiate it and bring it to fruition.
Time for question period has expired. Time for question period has expired. There was one point of order as raised by the member for Edmonton Highlands. After that, we will deal with notice of point of privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I recall that you called to order the members of the official opposition caucus for applauding the first question period in 11 months of our leader. And the way we did that was, of course, by the conventional form of applause. And we were called to order, Mr. Speaker, I assume on the understanding that it's the tradition of this House that not be done. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to point out that in fact, that tradition was changed on June 4th, 1987, when the Premier of Alberta, Mr. Getty, walked into the Assembly. Immediately, the Meech Lake Accord had been signed at the Langevin Block, when the entire caucus of government rose and put hand to hand to applaud, and I make the same case for our instance, Mr. Speaker.
The precedent of this House is, as we carry on through a question period and so forth, that the matter of applause really should be that of desk thumping. Unless the House directs the chair otherwise by some formal direction, the chair intends to continue to call members of the House to order no matter which side of the House they're on if they engage in clapping with the hands. The chair also recognizes that on certain occasions, if a party wishes to acknowledge their leader as the chair interpreted as today, that's one thing. But the chair then directed the House that the matter of applause in future would be that of desk thumping, again, until the House directs the chair otherwise. Point of privilege, Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise under Standing Order 15 of the Standing Orders of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. I wish to raise a question of a breach of privilege affecting me as a member of this Assembly, and I believe affecting all members of this Assembly. A number of constituents residing in the Calgary Mountain View constituency who lived in a publicly financed housing complex requested my help early in August of 1988. They wanted me to help resolve some landlord-tenant difficulties they were experiencing with their landlord. I approached the resident caretaker with these concerns to see if any solutions or resolutions could be achieved. He made it clear to me that he was upset by the fact that they had approached me as their member of the legislature. On August 31st, 1988, 3 families, including some of those who requested my help, received notices to vacate their rented premises. I firmly believe, Mr. Speaker, this action by the landlord was motivated by the fact that he believed those residents had petitioned their member of the legislature. For all intents and purposes, this action amounted to a form of punishment for them so doing. I also believe, Mr. Speaker, that this action, if allowed to go unchallenged, could cause others in Calgary Mountain View and people in other constituencies in Alberta to decline to approach their MLA out of fear that they too might be similarly punished. I am concerned not only with people in landlord-tenant relationships. There are all kinds of situations where people are in vulnerable positions and would like to ask their MLA to help them. All members must be sure that we are not powerless to protect such vulnerable individuals from retaliation if they step forward to ask our help. Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that you will find that a prima facie case of breach of privilege has taken place. I'm prepared to cite various references for your further consideration if you wish, but I will await your advice as to whether that is necessary this morning. Thank you for your consideration, and I rest my case and present it to you for your disposal.
Chair appreciates the prior notice as received from the member for Calgary Mountain View. The Chair will examine the transcript enhancer that is already presented and invites the member also to supply the appropriate references from Beauchesne, and the House will deal with the matter after question period on Monday. Thank you. Orders of the day? No, in a moment. The Chair apologizes to the House that both the clerk and the Speaker are due in Ottawa, and we're about to leave to catch a plane at 12 o'clock, we hope. We would like to vary the procedure for a moment and invite the Deputy Speaker to the Chair and the Assistant Clerk. Thank you.
Before proceeding further, might we revert briefly to introduction of special guests? I recognize the Honourable Minister for Occupational Health and Safety. No? Oh, George Hedges. Well, was there anybody that he asked to... All right, I'm sorry, I thought that he was here. The Honourable... orders of the day, I guess, is... Oh, the Honourable Member for Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and all honourable members for the approval to proceed with my...